to the very first African Voices 2020. This week, we joined a group of activists and asylum seekers, refugees, and community organizations in the city of Sheffield. They had gathered to protest and raise awareness of the crisis that currently faces asylum seekers in Libya. Several people have died while seeking safe passage into Europe and fleeing their countries, and these have died in detention centers that have been part funded by the European Union within Libya. The majority of those affected are people from Eritrea, and Eritreans have called upon the Western governments in Europe to stop the detention, the illegal detention and modern-day slavery of people seeking safe passage to Europe. Here's a summary of what happened during the weekend.
Yes, the search and rescue has been stopped in the Mediterranean Sea, and lots of European governments are working with the Libyan coast guards to intercept people from crossing the Mediterranean Sea. And in the last 6 months, in 2019, about 4,000 people were intercepted and sent back to Libya. And they are all suffering in detention centers, some of them, and most of them are in the hands of traffickers, and people are being sold as slaves. They are being tortured, being killed, and they are being a victim of the war in Libya, because there are two big massive groups fighting, and the refugees are in between dying. And I can remember on the 2nd of July 2019, for example, 53 people were killed in one of the detention centers. And last week, I was contacted by people from Libya. 2 young Eritrean men were shot dead by armed people. And so people are dying because of illness, because of starvation, because of the bad situation, and people are in a very, very, very crowded, inhuman detention centers where there is not even a space for them to breathe.
So and clearly, the people of Eritrea and other sub-Saharan African countries who've actually got refugees in Libya are grieved to see that the governments within Europe that we are part funding these detentions are complacent. But have you any idea how the African Union has been responding, or even the Arab League?
It's very unfortunate, and I think there isn't any that I know, and there is no any practical response to that. Still, they are suffering, and they are not getting. Nobody is listening to their plight.
Right. Okay. And if you could speak today to the European Union, if you could speak to the Libyan leaders, of course there are factions within Libya, so it's a bit chaotic, but there are powers there that could actually stop the suffering of these refugees. What would you say?
Asylum is a human right. Please leave people to practice their human rights, and that claiming asylum is a human right. At the moment, there are lots of people suffering in Libya, and I think that is everyone's human responsibility. That's humanity to rescue these stranded people in Libya, and that's everyone's responsibility. And stop the outsourcing detention suffering of people in Libya and financing all these groups to intercept people from exercising their human rights.
I'm here today to stand in solidarity with the refugees in Libya. Over the last year and a half now, I have been taking delegations to Calais. So we've done a lot of work. We volunteer for a charity called Care for Calais in France. And we've been doing some work, and we've met lots of refugees and asylum seekers over there. And that's really opened my eyes, really, around the situation over there, how horrendous it is, how difficult it is, and how we as a country need to continue to campaign for safe and legal routes into this country.
Lovely, thank you very much for that. Yeah, that's lovely. But could you now give us context in terms of some Eritreans you might have met and the current Eritrean situation and the Libyan situation actually in general?
What I've noticed going there over the last 2 times is there's a massive influx of young people from East Africa. And the conditions that they describe, I was talking to a young man who described how his journey took him from his country now to northern France, and it was just horrendous. How he was still alive is beyond me, but when I've gone down there, I have seen how the police come and torture them. They'll take away their camps, they'll take away their bedding. Sometimes they don't even know if they're going to get any food. There's no sanitation, no toilet facilities. And these are real people, real human beings who are living out there in these kind of conditions, in freezing cold weathers. And the authorities are just ignoring them, just letting them suffer like that. And I think it's disgusting and disgraceful. And I think us as a country, we need to continue to campaign for the rights of all refugees from across the world.
And just a question around governance. So the UK is part of the governments that are actually paying for some of these detention centres, the deterrent detention centres in Libya. You as a councillor, what would you say should be done differently with that money?
I think that money should not be spent on deterring people from come here. I think what that money should be spent on is helping people to find legal and safe ways to come into this country and let them process with their asylum case. Let them come into this country. Don't detain them and send them back without checking who they are, where they've come from and what their situation is like. There's so much more that we can do, but we're not doing enough. When we get to Calais, the barbed wire, the amount of police that's there, the amount of security that's there, is it really needed? If there were safe and legal ways for people to come here and seek asylum, would we need to spend that amount of money trying to protect our borders? These people are fleeing war and persecution. They are not just coming here, like the media keeps telling us, to claim benefits. I have spoken to many, many asylum seekers and refugees. A lot of them want to be in their own countries. They want to be safe with their families. They have no choice but to flee their countries. And it's really, really sad and tragic that in 2020 we are still talking about this and nothing has changed.
Well, I was going to come anyway because basically I've written a book about migration in Europe. I was part of the One Day Without Us campaign in solidarity with migrants in the UK. So it was natural that when I heard about this, I would come. And then I was invited to give a talk about it, to give a speech as well. So that's why I came.
Thank you very much. So given that you've had this much insight, so you probably know, have a bit more insight into the relationship between Europe and Libya when it comes to to them deterring refugees, if you will, and the kind of measures they've put in place. Could you tell us a bit about that, please?
Absolutely, yeah. One of the functions that Libya plays in Europe's border system is that before the fall of Gaddafi, Italy in particular, but the European Union in general, knew that Libya was a major transit country for migrants and refugees coming from the Sahara, trying to cross Libya to get to Europe. They knew that. And because the Libyan government was not part of the Geneva Convention, it was not obliged to do anything to uphold refugee rights in Libya. Europe kind of abandoned Libya to Gaddafi, giving him money, giving the Coast Guard money and so on. And Italy for a while had this pushback policy in which basically when they found migrants in the Mediterranean, they would push them back into Libyan territorial waters, and then those migrants would be taken back to a country where there were no refugee protections whatsoever, no human rights protections whatsoever. So all this was pretty bad even then, before 2011. And this was, when you had a functioning government, a dictatorship admittedly, but a functioning government. So you had refugee centres there with no oversight from UNHCR or any of the other NGOs. People knew the kind of things that were going on in there. You would hear reports of torture, rape, exploitation, semi-starvation, all this kind of stuff. All this has got like 10 times worse since the fall of Gaddafi because you've had no functioning state whatsoever. So to some extent what's happened in Libya is the treatment of refugees has been handed out, privatized, if you will, to warlords, militias and different groups, which makes it even harder to find out what is going on there. So there's enough known from the NGOs that have been there, like Médecins Frontières, that the conditions in Libya for migrants and refugees have got substantially worse. Because most of the time now, much of Libya is a war zone, which migrants now have to make their way back and forth across, a civil war zone. So even worse than that, the European Union now has a policy in which they're basically funding the Libyan Coast Guard and basically reverting to the old pushback policy. They've closed down, or at least drastically reduced, their search and rescue operations in the Mediterranean. So when they find people in the Mediterranean now, they give them back to the Libyan Coast Guard, who basically take them back to a country that is exactly what I've said, a war zone, where there's no international oversight whatsoever. So this isn't an accident.
No, it's not, yeah. So definitely you say it's not an accident. What is the implication of that on the actual human beings behind all this information? What is happening to those people? The refugees themselves, whilst they're in Libya, do we know what is happening apart from torture? What is their fate?
We hear from, for example, from demonstrations like this one, which are actually quite infrequent. We hear from some NGOs, we hear from some information coming out of Libya that you hear about refugees being killed in some situations because they are given jobs like clearing mines. This is kind of forced labour, and they're not professional mine clearers, but there have been situations in which Eritrean refugees have been forced to clear mines. You hear about the actual return of slave markets in Libya, in which you actually hear that migrants and refugees are actually being auctioned in slave markets. So we hear enough to know that what is happening is absolutely dire. But the point I was returning to earlier is this is not an accident. This is part of a policy which is accepted by European governments, even though they won't say so out loud, of deterrence. In other words, the worse Libya is, the more they hope that migrants will realise this and stop coming. So they have no interest, from their point of view, in improving the situation. So the only chance of improvement is going to be when pressure is built up on those governments from demonstrations like this.
And when we're talking about the front line, are we talking about Frontex? It's as the implementer of these policies on the European Union's front.
Frontex definitely plays a role in this because Frontex is the kind of European Union's border police. But sometimes that role is exaggerated. Sometimes Frontex is blamed for too much. I'm not saying it's blameless, but sometimes people act as if Frontex is responsible for all the things that go wrong. I mean, and you know, another thing is that sometimes the European Union itself is blamed for all the things that go wrong. I think it's an important thing to realise the European Union is a collection of member states. Those member states support the policy that is being put in place. So on one level we can condemn Frontex for its actions for basically being part of the pushback policy. We can condemn the European Commission for supporting it, but we should also be aware that no European government has protested what is taking place.
Okay. Absolutely appalling, obviously. But in terms of the global picture, which other countries do you know of that have had a say, or which ones would have an influence in this particular case outside of the European Union?
Outside the European Union, one would hope for more pressure from African countries. But I mean, basically, but it's very difficult for them to put pressure on a government that is barely functioning as a government. Part of the tragedy of Libya now is there is no functioning government. There is a civil war in progress, a civil war that is actually getting worse. So it's actually very difficult to find exactly where you go to put pressure on, you know. But there seems to be kind of like a kind of silence, a general silence about what is happening in Libya that is not only restricted to the European Union, it also takes place in Africa as well. You know, given that other African countries like Niger have also become part of the European Union's border control system. I don't expect Russia would do a single thing to make things any better for migrants. I mean, part of the tragedy in Libya is that migrants are basically not considered significant in the kind of geopolitical thing that is breaking out now when you have Turkish troops coming into Libya now. You have Russia becoming more and more influential there. We've seen elsewhere that in Turkey, for example, Erdogan entered into an agreement with the European Union in which he was basically stopping people coming. So none of these countries have any interest in upholding the basic principles of refugee protection or guaranteeing safe routes for migrants in Libya, or basically coming up with serious oversight of what facilities do exist. So the weak points, if you like, the points where pressure can be put on are in countries like this, are in the European Union, to my mind.
And as far as you can think, what could be the actual solution to this crisis in Libya at the moment? That's my final question.
There's no easy solution to any of these problems, but there must be, I think the situation in Libya for migrants has to be regarded as a humanitarian crisis, an ongoing humanitarian crisis to which safe routes to migration have to be found, including the possibility of evacuation of people who are left in situations when they're at risk, which actually applies to a lot of people.
I'm here today because touch my heart what they suffering, the young people and the children in Libya. And I was before Christmas Eve, I was in Brussels to give them food, because I know one time I was visiting, not to visit them, but I go from something organization with them. So when I go there, I saw the refugees, they sleep in the street. And when they say, oh, they have like more refugee inside, you can see them in Bahnhof. Bahnhof, you mean like a station. When we go there, they sleep and they have like toilet the side. It's not proper toilet. Yeah, they do in toilet, and then the smell is going. The young people, and then all of them, the men, the women, they sleeping together, and then they don't have, they sleep in the floor. So since that, like 6 months ago, I couldn't sleep. Then, yeah.
Okay, so thank you for that. There are two things you have mentioned. The first one is that you actually informed the international non-governmental organizations about the situation, and also that you're Eritrean. Could you give me a context of how things have been for you as an Eritrean, but also as an activist, when engaging with those international non-governmental organizations, and also with people you may know, your family, and because they're the most affected with the Libyan situation?
Yeah, because I work with organization. The reason let me to work with organization, I want to save the life for young people and life for human people. So when I was working with organization to get support, to help them, to get voice, because you can't do it by yourself as you African. So we couldn't do. We try it, and we say like we can get with our church as well, because I'm from church. I'm Catholic, so the sisters, they help us. They go with us. We go to the in London Parliament. We ask them, and Fiona Hogg, the MB for the Parliament. And when we ask her, she was helping since Libya, and the Libya we sort out with all or a big organization. They was like signing for us. They asked us like 10,000 petition. To be honest, we couldn't get 10,000 petition, but when we showed them, when we've been like voice with the church, with the sisters, we get like, they say enough, this 2,000. So we was happy, and then we get like solution in Sinai, because they was like sending people, doing lot of things. After that, now the Libya and Sudan, from Sudan, the problem is starting Sudan. The Sudan, they sell them. When they go there to cross to the country, because in my country they have dictatorship. That is the main issue. So and then they didn't know. Underground, they think like we don't have, because we have president, we have like life in my country. As you Eritrean, I feel it. I'm here, I'm okay, I'm safe. But all young people, they're crossing, they need safe place. Not because they want they change the country. No, they need safe place. They need save their life. But they think like they don't have a school. We don't have like nice country. We have nice country. We have everything in my country, but they're not safe.
Could you tell us a bit about the peace accord between Ethiopia and Eritrea and where things stand today?
Yeah, I've been in Ethiopia 5 years in camp to visit the refugee Eritrean. They have more than 200,050 in camp. If it's really peace, it's a fake, to be honest, fake. It's not really peace. When he came, Dr. Abiy, when he said peace, I was like, believe him. It's really peace. We was like happy, but when we saw no one is like mentioned to Eritrean people, and when he go to in Eritrea or Asmara in Eritrea, with people that he laughing, and then he say, "Oh, we're going to be peace." Imagine when he go Libya, he takes the Ethiopian, he leaves the Eritrean. Why? He say he's working like Corner Africa for all Corner Africa peace. So why he leave them to Eritrea and he takes the Ethiopian if it's really peace? When he go to Sudan, they have last 3 weeks ago, they was beating them, put them in prison, and they taking a lot of money from them. Why he didn't save them? He takes the Ethiopian. To be honest, this is not really peace.
So I hear what you're saying, but these alleged allegations, allegedly, is there any evidence you can point to?
Yes, they have allegation. I mean, like, what allegation?
The allegations in terms of how Abiy has been handling the peace accord, which you're saying is actually fake.
Yeah, because why I say that's fake, you know, because they have politic problem with Ethiopian Tigray. You know, Tigray, we have issue with Tigray, and then not with Ethiopian. The border, they didn't sign it. The border, they didn't. So if it's really peace, or he want peace with Eritrean and Ethiopian, or he want to bring them together, he have to mention to all national, or they have to stop how they suffering the young people. He never visit them to refugee camp in Tigray.
Save lives in Libya. Don't let refugees die in Libya. That was the rallying call of Eritreans and other activists such as SIMAG this afternoon here in Sheffield. And they've called upon UNHCR to go into Libya and rescue the tortured refugees that are there in detention centers. Speaking for African Voices, you've been with me, Chiwe Chihana, and behind the camera I've been joined by Bailo.